This is a joint press conference by the EPA and our we introduced Roland, Dr. Roland Wave from the MNG Gold in the Bear Mountain Mining Corporation. We want to welcome you to the EPA. We'll read a statement and take one or two questions. And Roland will be here with us. We want to say good afternoon, right? And welcome to EPA. We've called you to provide some information to you with updates on circumstances surrounding the importation of approximately 4,000 metric tons of ammonium nitrate. If you do recall, back in September, there was a news report about the importation of that. The EPA wants to go back as to how our involvement has been. Let me introduce also Raf. Raf is the head of our laboratory. Raf is one of the best in this country. Raf is by training an analytical chemist, and he is our top scientist in that area. And so I'm pleased to introduce him to you. But coming back, the importation that was reported came in 4,000 metric tons. Usually, the importer of that chemical, which translates to explosive, receives a license from a special body at the Ministry of Lands and Mines and a multi-agency commission that includes the Ministry of Lands, Mines and Energy, Ministry of Justice, the security agencies. And after they give them the license, then the importer can go and bring in the explosive. But the law of the EPA, because of the impact and potential impact of explosive on the environment, the Environmental Protection and Management Law of Liberia requires that such importer obtains a license from the EPA. The case in point, license was now obtained. We contacted the Ministry of Lands and Mines that said, yes, we have given a license. So we then went to Bear Mountain because we knew that only very few people who have brought it in. We went to Bear Mountain, and we told Bear Mountain that the chemicals that you brought in require licensing. It's a misstep. And at that point, by law, it's a matter of trying to remediate the situation. And we put in a number of steps, safety steps that were necessary to make sure that the chemical brought in the country was kept in a safe environment. We have a procedure here, and Ralph will explain what that procedure is and where we went and how we work with the mountain to make sure that all the safety measures were taken and to ensure that further importation of that will be subject to those rules and regulations. The purpose of this meeting, of this press conference, is to explain that we work with Bear Mountain. He can ask him some questions, he will make a statement, he will say something, and then I will end up, and then we can open for some questions.
So you just introduce yourself and put your hand up, we recognize you and introduce yourself and ask a question. Okay, so before that, yes.
Right, good afternoon everyone. My name is Roland de Grief. I'm the Technical Services Manager of Bear Mountain. I've been here for quite a few years, so I'm familiar with the site, I'm familiar with the operations, and I understand the importation process here and the subject that we're dealing with, so I'd be quite happy to answer some questions later on.
Okay, thank you. I'm Raphael Sajigongu, the head of the Environmental Research and Standards Laboratory at the EPA. So I've had several training internationally with the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. So we We have a lot of knowledge on the issue of chemicals and those that are even used as explosive or those that could be weaponized. So our dealings with M&G Gold, BA Mountain, and KPS, but the family BA Mountain Mining Company had to do with putting in the steps, like Prof said, to remediate the situation. So it was a kind of three-pronged steps. What we did first when we heard about this licensing that had been issued by the Joint Commission on Explosive, LNP, the security sector, and then Mines and Energy, we engaged them and they told us, yes, we've issued a license, but we did not know that EPA also had to issue another license that has to do with chemical registration and importation. So that will be able, no matter how much chemical you bring in Liberia and what procedure you put into utilize those chemicals, believe me, they end up in the environment. And the environment is, we as human receptors, the environment is the land around us, is the water, and all of the other creatures around. So they eventually end, or that's what we call the fate, F-A-T-E, of the chemical. So since we are guarding the fate of the chemical by law, we need to be able to issue you a license, tell you how you make use of those, and what are the procedures you put in to ensure that your utilization of the chemical has a very minimal impact on our environment. So we first set up, the first step was to ensure that they got the license. We went through that procedure, engaged in Mountain Mining Company. They obtained the license. We can say that they now have a license for the 4,000 metric tons of chemical that was imported back in June. So the next step was to launch a recon. A reconnaissance was to go on site because they had reported, the news had reported from Africa reported that the chemicals that caused Beirut bombing smuggled into Liberia. That was the caption. So we noticed that the high stockpile of the chemicals in the On Your Own community at the outskirts of on the Monrovia Highway, that's in Buchanan. So we observed the area and we needed to come with the test that had to do with a detailed analysis. On the 11th of November this year, we visited the facility. There were technicians of the agency. We looked at the air quality situation at the facility. We looked at the chemical importation documents that they had, because in addition to the license that we issue, there are also issue of material safety data sheet, how the chemical is being used, and in the event of an emergency, how do you deal with it. So we look at the health and safety policy being put in place. We look at the proximity of the storage point to nearby receptors. So those houses around there, was a distance between the fence and that of the habitat. We also look at the proximity to wetland, because for the wetland, they play a very important role to absorb shock in terms of flooding. They also serve as home for a lot of creatures around. So if you have a facility that may have a potential of polluting, and you have to know the distance apart, we assess that we did what we call georeferencing. So at the end of the day, we noticed, like Prof said, some missteps, and we'll be able to work with the mountain to rectify those. And we can also inform the press that just within that time, second batch of chemicals came in the country, 5,000 metric tons. So you had initially 4,000, that had a problem, 5,000 metric tons. We've worked with them this time around to ensure that as much as possible, the chemicals are transported near the point of use. So they have been on a daily basis, we get a report. We make sure we have EPA escorts, and I can report to the press that we've had about, as of last night, we had about 3,000 metric tons of the 5,000 metric tons of ammonium nitrate being escorted safely arrive at the plant in Kinjobra and Cape County. So we have just about 2,000 metric tons now sitting at the port, and we are working with them to ensure that we don't have it transported at the storage facility that has now a problem that we need to work. But as we go to the press, we'll be working with the mountain and showing that all of the risks posed to the environment, we are as much as possible remediated. So that's what I would be happy to answer specific questions at the end of
So, ladies and gentlemen, I can say that the EPA can assure the public that it has the scientists with the requisite background and people who have done several courses in regulatory enforcement and management of hazardous chemicals under the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. We also have staff who have handled projects under the strategic approach to integrated chemical management, which is a world-class regime for the management of chemicals. As you know, Liberia is signatory and party to the Rotterdam Convention, the Basel Convention, and these are conventions that govern the movement and the trading of chemicals. The missteps, the agency is working to continue to train our people. We also have staff that are on their way to training. The agency has the requisite capacity, as I said, and expertise to enforce regulatory requirements. And the EPA has also put in place measures to ensure that Beer Mountain and other importers of chemicals are in the position to utilize the chemicals in an environmentally safe and sustainable environment. Let me say also, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that the importation of ammonium nitrate here has not been the first time. It has been ongoing since major mining activities started after our war. The concessions companies have used the chemical for controlled blasting for the last 10 to 15 years. Like they built PHP built Billiton, ArcelorMittal, they still use it. So this is not the first time. As a matter of fact, ammonium nitrate has also been imported into this country as fertilizers. And the state in which we have it is not the state in which they had it in Lebanon across the blasting. So in other words, we are assuring the public that safety has been assured, and our people are working with the mountain and their subsidiaries that are involved in the importation of these chemicals to ensure that the environment is protected, that safety of our people is ensured. So the message we want you to carry is one, yes, the first 4,000 metric tons did come into the country before we got to know. We corrected that, we took some steps. You may want to find out what the missteps are. The missteps are you should have gotten a license before. They didn't get the license and they corrected that. Two, the other missteps, they should have filed an environmental management plan with us as to how they go in the chain of custody. In other words, when you bring the chemical, you are not supposed to put it on the raw soil. You're supposed to build concrete slabs on which it can sit. And on those slabs, you build pellets, because you don't want the ammonium nitrate to have direct contact with the ground. It contaminates the groundwater. And so they took those steps. They have concrete slabs now on which they sit, and pallets. The pellets have been built to make sure that it's done. Two, we also have taken steps, the government has taken steps to provide 24-hour security, because we don't want anybody to have access to it. So the message we want you to carry on: one, yes, the chemical was brought in 4,000 metric tons, but the EPA immediately jumped in and started working with Beer Mountain. They recognized and made steps, but all of the steps that are necessary to ensure a safety environment of our people, that we have, and we do not have an uncontrolled or blasting of those chemicals have been taken. And we also want to inform you that this is not the first time chemical has come. We now have regime in place to ensure that there is no continuing inflow of chemicals, to ensure that the blasting and the mining operations are in place. The third thing we want you to know is that we have spoken to the industry that, given the nature of the explosive, the chemical, we are working with them to have a meeting to ensure that we can regulate the aggregate amount of ammonium nitrate that can be present in the country at one point in time. The reason we want to ensure that it is safe and can be managed, and we don't have more than we desire in terms of their operations. Thank you very much. I would ask a few questions, and then
I'm also the reporter from the Heritage Newspaper.
Yeah, Batu, how are you? Okay.
You acknowledge the mistake of Pierre Martin. So what, is there any penalty on the book, on the EPA board as it relates to punishment?
Yes.
For the mistake?
Yeah.
You care to comment on that?
Yes, the punishment. The punishment was that there was the bill. They now go slow on anything else until they build the pellets and the ammonium nitrate. I think there was a restoration fee that was imposed, some 29,000. That's what the law allows, and that was paid. That was promptly paid, and so we had to do the remediation by issuing them the license to do so.
What do you mean by go slow and anything?
No. You cannot go further with the handling of the chemical. It goes through a process called emulsification. Emulsification, you take the raw chemical and you mix it with another acid to create the explosive. The chemical in its own present state is not volatile. And we told them you can't do that until you correct this, until you got the license, and they promptly comply with that.
You please say your name before you ask a question.
Let me just take the first one. I'm first out from the Democrat.
Yes.
So currently you have 9,000 metric tons. So what's the reason?
No. The 4,000 was consumed.
Okay.
Because they use it for blasting. The emulsification and put it in the state that it turns to explosive that is used in the mines. What we have now, there are another 5,000 that came. But because the storage capacity in Buchanan has not been brought to the level of safety that we want, we advise them to move it directly to the mine. Right? And the scientists said, we've done 3,000 so far. The other 2,000 is on the boat in Buchanan. And he's here. We are making arrangements. They're making additional arrangement. We're putting another group of scientists on to accompany it there.
So what's the reasonable threshold for the number of quantity that you need?
That's what I said. We are having a meeting. It depends on. These are investors. They have to sit with us and tell us how much would they need, right? How much would they need? If we know how much they need, then we can reason to say, okay, you can bring this quantity in at this time. But it cannot surpass that.
Okay, I'm Daniel Rogers, Hot FM, and Sammy like we are under the microscope. In this same discussion we're having, we took a trip to a town called Sewa Town.
Yeah,
you have,
so on the water.
You saw that. Okay,
yeah.
Sewa Town. That was in Siga 4, where the MATO station. We talked to locals, and your predecessor, those who were here before you, said that there is a recommendation because of the cyanide spillage. They recommended that that town be relocated. How far are we in terms of that town?
And we stick our
It
question
has to do with chemical. It has to do
and we
with
stick to the
chemical.
issue about this profit.
Prof,
We take you.
you want
Was ever.
Okay.
We take you. Comment.
My name is Gerald Coyne and I work for Frontage Africa newspaper. You announced that additional 5,000 ammonium nitrate has arrived, and it is not going to the original storage site. What are you doing to relocate the current 4,000 that is already there?
You're not listening. The 4,000 came in May. You don't assume that it's still sitting there. I told you that has been consumed already. Now they're bringing another site. It's not cumulative. They use it for the mine. So that quantity is no longer there. Maybe Roy, you can answer that.
Every month we do blasting, and every month we need explosives for that blasting. That consumes a certain tonnage of ammonium nitrate that is mixed to produce this emulsion, which is the explosives. So we're consuming it all the time. So the 4,000 tons that was originally sat there, that's already been taken to the mine, and most of that's being used. 5,000 has come to replace it, and that's in the process of being moved to the mine.
Okay, let me follow up with that. The very situation brought light to the entire importation of ammonium nitrates. So since the operation of B-Mount, what's the quantity you have used here?
I don't have that number on top of my head.
Yeah.
I don't have that number on.
Okay, on the reasonable basis, on the monthly basis, or on the monthly basis, how many quantity do you?
I don't have that number in my head. It's a
So-
significant tonnage that is used, so regularly we have to bring in thousands of tons of this material because it's an extremely large operation. There's every ton of rock that is mined, every ton of ore that is mined needs to be blasted. So it's a drilling and blasting operation, and all that blasting needs ammonium nitrate material for the blasting. So there's no oxides and soils and things that are being mined. This is all hard rock mining. So that's the consumer of the product.
Before June, you have not been
So
working
what
with EPA. Before June this year, you have not been working with EPA.
We've worked
No, they work with EPA. What I'm saying,
EPA for a long time.
they've been working with EPA from the very start. There's something called environmental and social impact assessment. It has to be done before you get anything. In fact, globally, you can't start any operation until that is done. They've been working with us. Where we had this problem was they realized they needed ammonium nitrate because it increases the level of recovery, right? Raj probably know more that it increases your, if you once started digging here, you probably will get 60%. If you use ammonium nitrate, you can get 90%. So it was their first consignment, isn't that correct? And they brought it in. But they brought it in without a permit, even though they got a license from Lands and Mines, but they require a license, a permit from us.
So there's the two
Let me take
departments,
OKF.
Lands and Mines and EPA.
Yeah.
Lands and Mines, that was all done, but the EPA was
And when we got a hold of them,
that was late.
they regularized that.
Yes, that was late.
Okay, thank you. My name is Van and I work for OKFM. I'm concerned. The scientists lay some technical basis about this ammonium nitrates. I just want to know what's the assurance that you're giving the people there in Grand Kippa and other BMIs in places of operation that this chemical will not have an adverse effect like what we witnessed in Beirut. Because that's why I really brought the entire thing to the level of the Liberia Republic.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so I'll take you to small science. For an explosion to occur, let me take you to the Beirut scenario. You need something called the fire triangle. So you need 3 ingredients. You must have a category of chemical we call a class of material called oxidizer. So those are materials containing oxygen, and it can likely cause fire if they are mixed with other materials. So ammonium nitrate has, it is an oxidizer. So by virtue of the fact it becomes one portion of the fire triangle. Then there's a second part of the fire triangle that is called fuel. So the one we call fuel. It could be a plastic, it could be wood, any of those materials would be a fuel, a useful source for mixing with the oxidizer now to form 2 ingredients. Then the third one you need for fire to occur is a source, the source of fire. So someone could pass that have smoke, just like lit the cigarette, throw it in there, you have that fire source. And then you have fire that has been lit. You have the fuel, in the case the bags of ammonium nitrate with plastic, so you already have fuel. The ammonium nitrate says the third ingredient, oxidizer. If all 3 are mixed in certain proportion, then you have an explosion. So in the case of Beirut, you had about just over 2,000 metric tons in Beirut around.
2007.
Yeah, just 2,007 metric tons of ammonium nitrate that was sat in the warehouse for a long period of time. Then you had electricity there, so you had a shock. So you had this plastic, which is a fuel, you had the ammonium nitrate and oxidizer, so you only needed the third ingredient. So electric shock, equal proportion, then the blasting occurred. So what we did in the Buchanan situation was, you don't want the 3 ingredients coming together, so you remove one of the ingredients. So we had the fence, the entire area was fenced, mined by officers of the Liberia National Police and officers, because it is a chemical but can also be used as a weapon. So we had security staff there, but around the periphery of the fence you had electricity. So that was the third ingredient. We had all 3 ingredients, but they were not coming together in the proportion required to cause explosion, but that was an accident in which. So what the EPA did immediately was to go, we made sure that we took up that surprise ingredient of the fire. So we now had 2. But for that 2, then you could have lightning to come and third ingredient, but you needed to have it cover being placed on cemented wall and not wooden pallet, because wooden pallet, remember, is one of the things that listed as a fuel. So we've removed those wooden pallets. We had them on granite or cemented floor. We've taken the element of fire off, so we deactivated in a way 2 of the 3 ingredients required. However, we still said no, there are also other environmental dangers. One, we want to ensure that where the ammonium nitrate is situated is at least 100 meters away from, say, a wetland, or 100 meters away from the nearest habitat area, of course, that you have people living in. So we look at that. Some of, like where we had the wetland and the position of the ammonium nitrate near the fence, we looked at it fell short of that. So we've now made sure that in the future, if that area is able to be considered, that had to be looked at, and we now have a new portion of the fence that those can be packed on cemented pallet. So at any point in time, the EPA tries as much as possible to remove the third or second element of the fire triangle. So we cannot have, and we'll try as much as possible that we do not have them, because we know what to do and we know the mechanism to put in place if we work with them.
Okay, so we end right here. So thank you for coming.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.